Hello and welcome to this special 70th anniversary video. On this video, I'm going to interview Paul Estabrooks, a legend around Open Doors who's been working and strengthening the persecuted church for more than 45 years. I know you're going to enjoy hearing from him, his stories, his understanding of what Open Doors has done, and hear the impact that the work Open Doors has made through your prayers for 70 years. Enjoy this interview.
You're listening to the Open Doors Canada podcast. At Open Doors, we work to strengthen Christians where faith costs the most so that they can continue to be the church in some of the most dangerous places on earth. In this podcast, we analyze current persecution trends, share stories from Christians that face high levels of persecution for their faith, and always stand with them in prayer. Thanks for joining us. Here's today's episode.
In 1955, a young Dutchman by the name of Brother Andrew made his first trip behind the Iron Curtain and found a church there that thought the West had forgotten about them, a church that was hurting, and he felt the call from God to strengthen what remains and is at the point of death. Fast forward 70 years, and Open Doors is the ministry that now exists because of that first step that Brother Andrew took in 1955. And so this year we're celebrating our 70th anniversary. And so I'm so pleased today to be joined by Paul Estabrooks. Paul Estabrooks, rather than tell everyone why I've asked you here for our 70th anniversary, Paul, why don't you've been around Open Doors for a long time. Tell us a little bit about when and how you got involved with Open Doors.
All right. My wife and I were from Canada, of course, and we were missionaries in the Philippines with Far East Broadcasting Company. And that has a lot to do with my beginnings with Open Doors, because most of the workers of Open Doors Asia, this was Brother Andrew's Asia office based in Manila, almost all of them were originally from Far East Broadcasting Company. So we all worked together before, and then we worked together in Open Doors. So that was the connection. We arrived there in 1971. I took time to learn the Filipino language, and then I worked as the manager of a 50,000 watt AM station that blasted all over the country. I was the last, what they called Americano. Anybody who was Western in the Philippines was known as an Americano. The only people who didn't like that were those from Germany for some reason. But I worked with AM radio and the team. It was a Filipino team. And then when martial law was declared in 1972, no foreigners were allowed to be managers of anything in terms of broadcasting.
Okay.
Now, except for international. So I was moved to head the international operations of Open Door, of Far East Broadcasting Company in 1973. And I worked with young men, engineers, programmers, whatever, that were very interested in China. One of them, we also had a printing operation at the radio station.
Okay.
And Marshburn Press, it was called, and a large printing system that could actually print Bibles on Bible paper. And we did a lot of projects that brought the interest of Brother Andrew to come and visit. So in 1972, Brother Andrew visited us, and that was when I first got to know him. We had a funny experience that when we had a reception for him with all the missionaries, and my wife brought him a book to autograph for her, and she had erroneously picked up the book called Tortured for Christ by Richard Wurmbrand. And Andrew still laughed about that till the last time we saw him. But that began a friendship that continued to develop. In 1975, Brother David, his name was publicly, his real name was Doug Sutphin, was a missionary who worked at the printing operation in Manila at our place. He left FEBC to start the Asia office for Brother Andrew in 1975. The first thing they did was a big conference called Love China. And they had 400 people from all over the world and all different ministries. And it was essentially a prayer campaign to trust God and to talk about what are we going to do when the doors to China open. And there was a lot of, expectation that that day would come. And so Doug Sutphin was the head of that. I worked with Brother Andrew. I actually was the song leader. We called them song leaders in those days, when you led music this way. And Brother Andrew was the keynote speaker. And that was another connection. Then in 1977, I had a chance to visit China before anybody else in Open Doors other than Andrew himself. Brother Andrew visited in 1965, just as a visitor.
Yeah, that shows up in God's Smuggler. He talks about that,
just 1 year before the Cultural Revolution started. I was there 10 years later, at the end of the Cultural Revolution, with a Canadian friendship tour of all Canadians, because Pierre Trudeau had established diplomatic relations with China. And so I got to monitor how well our broadcasts were coming in and to actually meet one listener who spoke perfect English, who made me promise that if I ever came back to China, I would bring her some Bibles, Chinese Bibles, because they were desperate for them. She said, I'm leading people to Jesus every week, and we have no Bibles to give them. And I said, well, tell them to listen to our radio station, because we did Bible by dictation at night from there. That was the whole process, where by 1979, at the end of that decade, after spending that decade in doing radio ministry, which I loved, I was asked by Open Doors to join the team. Yeah. And that was how I got involved with Open Doors. Our very first request was for 30,000 New Testaments, which was called Project Rainbow, which then led to Project Pearl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a lot to talk about in just how you got involved. Obviously, you knew Brother Andrew for a long time. You were friends with him.
Yeah.
Give us some of your personal recollections, reflections on who Brother Andrew was, what made him who he was, and just talk a bit about Brother Andrew.
Well, he was a man who when asked if you were to live your life over again, what would you do? And he would always say, I would be more radical, not fanatical. He said, not fanatical, but radical. And so we called him the radical man. He loved, he was very, very strong in wanting to serve the persecuted church and enlisting other people to help with that. But at the same time, he was very personable. He was a family man, had 5 children. Yeah. And when he would have dinner with us at our home, which he did every visit to Manila, he would always include the children in the discussion around the table. Most adults who visited us would always talk to Diane and me, and the kids would listen. With Andrew, he would talk to every one of them and get them, to kind of pull them into the discussion. And so they really loved him. I mean, it was great. He told them about his son having a bicycle built for 2, but not this way, but this way. one on top of the
What?
other. Yes, he actually. So when we visited Holland for the first time in 1985, the first thing the kids said, we went to visit Andrew, and they said, "Show us the bicycle. We want to see it." So they go into the garage, and he showed them the bicycle.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
incredible. No, brother, like I know that you wrote something for the 70th anniversary about Brother Andrew and about the type of man he was.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that impressed other people was his humility. Unless you recognized him, you would never know he was the Brother Andrew, the God smuggler. And I love the story of a YWAM group that were going to Europe at the time of the Olympics in Germany. And they went to a Bible school first to do some ministry there musically. And when they arrived, there was a man working in the garden. And he said to them, they said, "We're the music group coming to perform tonight." And he said, "Oh, can I help you?" And they said, "Yeah." So he carried all their stuff. They said he spent an hour carrying all their equipment and everything into the room. And then that night they performed musically. And then the guest speaker was introduced, and it was Brother Andrew. And they realized, that's the man we thought was the gardener.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's some incredible stories of the type of person Brother Andrew was,
Yeah.
and so God used him to start this incredible ministry, and it started with Bible smuggling. Obviously, he did it for years behind the Iron Curtain, but you were involved in Bible smuggling in what's called Project Pearl, that is probably the biggest or one of the biggest projects Open Doors has ever done.
Yeah.
Now, we've done a whole podcast on this, and so if you want to hear the whole story, it'll be in the show notes. But tell us a little bit about Project Pearl.
Okay. It was the largest clandestine project that Open Doors ever did. Later, we were able to do things legally, which was what Brother Andrew always would have preferred to have done.
Yes.
But in years that things were not available, or openly available, he would do whatever it took to get God's word to people. I mentioned that when I joined Open Doors in 1979, the very first thing that I got involved in was coordinating 30,000 New Testament delivery to China. Before that time, they had not even taken 2,000 Bibles into the country. And so it was something really new. And we were using suitcase method, going to a trade fair. And in 10 days, God enabled 30,000 little New Testaments to get into the country. With 30 different couriers, we call the people who carried them. And that prompted a response that said, oh, they weren't anywhere near enough. In fact, Mama Kwong, the head of a large network of house churches, she was the one who specifically said, we need 1 million Bibles. This time we want the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, and we would like them all at one time, all at one place. And they identified the place. It was near the city of Santo on the southern coast of China, right across from Taiwan. Okay. Next month, I've been asked to do some meetings in Taiwan for Open Doors. And I noticed that when I fly from Hong Kong over there, we're the one city right above that airline route is Santo. And there's a beach there. And many Christians lived around that area. And they could get a lot of help if we were able to put 1 million Bibles on that beach. And that was the challenge. 1 million Bibles weighed 232 tons. And We had hoped to get them off the barge. We had a tugboat, Michael, pulling a barge, Gabriella. And on Gabriella were 232 one-ton waterproof packages with boxes of Bibles in it. And so we were able to get 20 men on that tugboat on the night of delivery, which was June the 18th, 1981. We went into the beach just as it got dark at 6 o'clock. And we actually got to the beach itself by 9 o'clock at night. And we began unloading those Bibles onto the beach. And in 2 hours, we had hoped to do it in 1, but it was hard to practice. So in 2 hours, we were able to get 1 million Bibles onto that beach. And those believers then took them. But it took them 5 years to actually distribute them carefully all through the entire country.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I've read your book, A Night with a Million Miracles. I've talked to you about this before. Just tell us a little bit about the impact that had. I know that you've heard stories or met people who were impacted by that. So just share a bit about that.
Oh yeah, there are a lot of them. I hope we have enough time. The overall impact was significant because of something we didn't even know. What was happening was that there were house churches that developed during the Cultural Revolution. Now that things had begun to open, the pressure was off, so to speak. Those house churches began to be very, very, very aggressive in their evangelism in the countrysides. And so the house church movement was growing phenomenally. We weren't even aware. In fact, when we did Project Pearl, our research said that there were 10 million Christians in China. We were going to provide 1 million Bibles for 10 million believers. But within a year after Project Pearl, all the research in Hong Kong and with Christian researchers was that the church was actually 50 million in China. Really, it was that much. And during that decade of the 80s, the house church movement just began to flourish. And they attributed those 1 million Bibles to part of what encouraged that flourishing of the church there. But the one story that I like the best is a young man who was a house church pastor, and he had a young group of young people. None of them had a Bible, and that still makes me wonder, well, how do you run a fellowship time when nobody has a Bible? He would pray for a Bible every day, but he found a pastor nearby, 20 kilometers away. He'd bicycle there, read from that pastor's Bible, come back and teach his group what he learned from that reading. And after Project Pearl, he received one of those Project Pearl Bibles. Now he's so excited to have his prayer answered. He reads the whole Bible through in 1 week. And the second week, he read it all the way through a second time. Third week, a third time. And then he said, my people don't know this message. I need to tell them. So he became an itinerant evangelist, traveling all through the countrysides with that little Bible, telling people about Jesus and leading people to faith and planting house churches.
Yeah.
15 years later, 1996, a young gal from Open Doors in Hong Kong, who, by the way, is a Canadian, and she's retired now here in Canada, but she was received a request from a house church leader saying we need 20,000 Bibles every month for new believers that we're leading to the Lord. And she thought, wow, that seems to be a lot, 20,000. I need to check it out. So she went in personally to visit this man, and it turns out it was the man I was just telling you about. Now, 15 years later, he now is the head of a network of house churches, and they numbered over 400,000 believers. And they were leading to the Lord 20,000 people a month, and they needed Bibles. So she saw his Project Pearl Bible and realized that's how I learned this story was from her. And she traded him a big study Bible for his little Project Pearl Bible. And today I still have that Bible of his as a souvenir.
That's amazing.
Of Project Pearl. But it was just one of many, many stories.
Yeah. The impact of Bible smuggling and the difference of putting a Bible in a person's hands. I mean, huge impact. I mean, 400,000 people because that guy got a Bible and he wasn't traveling 20 kilometers by bike to read it anymore. That's incredible. Now, Open Doors, obviously we began with Bible smuggling with Brother Andrew and things like Project Pearl, but there came a time where we realized that Bibles wasn't the only thing the persecuted church needed. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that we started doing and why that came about?
Well, it started in China, where we were strong, especially for Open Doors Asia. Once all these believers started getting Bibles, then they said, our problem is, we still need lots of Bibles, but our bigger problem is leadership. We're now leading people to faith in great numbers, but we don't have the leadership to lead them. And we need some leadership training for, and in-depth Bible training for future leaders. So the first thing we began doing after the Bible deliveries was then doing training sessions, especially in China, which were secret sessions that would go on from early morning to late at night for 2 weeks straight. And it was just amazing how much they loved that opportunity and the impact that it had. So training became a second factor in the ministry. And then the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, now you could go into all of what was considered a closed area for years, and easily take Bibles and easily do training. And that then, even before that time, Brother Andrew was already visiting Muslim countries and began to realize that the church in the Muslim world was needy in terms of encouragement and all kinds of different things other than just delivering Bibles. Then we were one time we had a seminar. I wasn't at this one, but a South African brother was at a seminar in Sudan.
Yes.
And the people were so hungry, they couldn't stay awake during the seminar. Really. I mean, they would faint or just go to sleep or whatever. He couldn't get any, and they wanted to be trained. They wanted the training. So it wasn't lack of motivation. And he realized these people are starving. I mean, we've got to do something for them. So that began a special project. And that was around 1997. That was when Open Doors began doing special projects like that to help Christians who had special needs. And then from that came the aspect of helping Christians that are needing employment or need a hand to get started with employment. when they're so isolated because of their faith
Yeah.
and can't get a job.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the things we were able to do would be to help them get started with a job.
Yeah.
And women's sewing machines and different socioeconomic projects like that began to develop. Till today, that's still
still
very
very
much a
important
part
to the
of
work
what
that
we
we
do.
Mm.
And so that transition, the decade of the 1990s, was a real decade of transition for Open Doors. And a lot of it was based on prayer. In fact, when people ask me, how did Open Doors survive and thrive for 70 years? I am partially convinced that it was because of the focus on prayer. I mean, Brother Andrew would say, the first thing they ask us for, even before Bibles, is that we pray for them.
Yeah.
And he was really serious about that. And we would establish prayer campaigns. Like in the 1980s, there was a young man named Alexander Ogorodnikov in Russia, who I later became a close friend with Alexander, or Sasha, as his nickname is. He was in the Gulag and very, very discouraged. And we had a seven-year prayer program for him, and he was ultimately released. Then, in 1983, Brother Andrew and the team in Holland were reading about the walls of Jericho falling down. And they said, you know what? We need to pray that in 7 years, the walls of the Soviet Union will collapse. And so they actually started a prayer campaign in 1983. I was in Singapore working for Open Doors at this time, but they started that prayer campaign, and of course, 7.5 years later, the Soviet Union collapsed. The Berlin Wall came down, and everything opened up. And so then we started, all through the 90s, a prayer campaign for the church in the Muslim world, not the Muslim world itself, but for the church that's in the Muslim world. And we felt by the end of the 90s that God had done some amazing things, even in answer to those prayers. And I think those prayer campaigns were what also kept our supporters and friends focused on the persecuted church.
Prayer, I mean, it's one of our core values. You read about it. One of the things that's said around Open Doors is prayer is like oxygen, right? And it really is important, and it's a good reminder to us as we go into maybe the next 70 years that it all starts with prayer and putting it before God and letting Him do His work. Can you share about how Open Doors got involved with trauma care?
Our trauma care training began in Iraq, and this was in the 1990s, after the Desert Storm in 91. There were challenges to the Christians in Iraq and the years following. Later in the 2000s by ISIS, where Christians would be treated pretty brutally. And it began to realize that this trauma that they went through was influencing their life from that time onward. I mean, even the rest of the world really was not totally conscious of the need for trauma healing. Even soldiers, when you think about it, so many soldiers came back from World War II who had trauma results in their life, and who had a very difficult time reestablishing themselves here in North America. And that's when the secular world began to realize that there is a process that they need to go through to deal with traumatic events that have occurred. And Christians have come along and realized that there are spiritual elements to that healing as well. And so, starting in Iraq, then trauma healing began to spread through, and then to Nigeria and other places where Christians were being treated very, very badly. And the trauma was causing difficulties for them. And so trauma healing also became one of the things that Open Doors became very interested in, and realized that it needed to be shared
For sure.
in many, many places.
Yeah, for sure. It's amazing the way God has moved and shaped our work based on the needs of the persecuted church.
Yeah. And I think that's also the other aspect of explanation for Open Doors' longevity. As a ministry, we continually respond to requests, and that was the thing about Project Pearl. People look at Project Pearl as a big, almost like an adventure project. It was not that at all. It was answering a request for 1 million Bibles, just a very big request. But that's what it really was. And I believe that's why God enabled it to happen, because he wanted his people to have those scriptures.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about that still, that as a ministry, we don't go telling the persecuted church what they need. We go and try to respond to what they ask us to do. And it shapes our work, and it's so important. And I appreciate you pointing that out as part of the longevity of Open Doors, is because we're answering the needs of the persecuted church. We're not just trying to say, hey, it's how can we help you? Yeah. And that's amazing.
Even when it came to Bible translations, the Chinese Bible was translated in 1911. I mean, our King James was 1611, but the language of the Chinese Bible in 1911 was quite different from what became under Mao and communism. The language began to change, and so there were many translations, literal translations, done in Hong Kong in the latter part of last century and this century. And rather than tell believers, this is a good translation, you should have it, what the teams did was they would take a copy of the new translation and say, we're bringing you the traditional Chinese Bible, which is fine. And if that's what you want, we'll bring that as long as you want. But give this one a look, look this over, read this one and see what you think of it. And some of them said, oh yeah, we like that a lot better, please bring us that. There were others who said, no, we want the traditional, well, it was fine. It was what they wanted, not what we were recommending.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I mean, you've told us about some big projects, amazing things God has done through Open Doors in the last 70 years. And it's encouraging to hear all this, but perhaps you could tell us a story about a brother or a sister living in persecution that really reminds you about why we do what we do.
Well, I think the first one would be a good one. I talked about Alexander Ogorodnikov. This was a young man who grew up in a atheistic society and home. Went to university, was in studied cinematography, and he watched a movie. I mean, a Hollywood movie called King of Kings.
Okay.
About Jesus. That was his first real introduction, even in a Orthodox church environment there. But that was his first introduction to Jesus, was in a Hollywood movie. But it tweaked his imagination and his interest, and he began studying about Jesus. He got a hold of a New Testament, and he started a youth group, what we would call just a youth group, called the Christian Seminar. And these young people would all meet together, and he would start teaching them. They would study together the teachings of Jesus and realizing, wow, this is different from the rest of what's going on in our world. And it was very amazing. Obviously, the KGB were watching this closely and not happy at all about this. In fact, he tells a story now about how one man came into one of their meetings of the Christian Seminar and sat in the back. They thought that he was probably KGB, but they weren't going to be intimidated. They just kept on going with their Bible study and their discussion. And this man, after the end of the meeting, came to the front and said, I'm actually a relative of the last Tsar who was killed. And he said, I come from St. Petersburg. This happened in Moscow. And he said, I've been listening to you young men, and I have been very impressed with your outlook on life and what you're learning. He said, if there had only been 10 of you in St. Petersburg in 1917, there would never have been a revolution. Imagine if there had only been 10 young people who would be teaching others the principles of Jesus. There would never have been that Russian Revolution. Amazing. Anyway, Alexander was told to stop, and of course he refused. And so he was arrested, and he was ultimately sentenced to many years in the Gulag out in Siberia. And he had a very rough time there. It was a very terrible time. But while Alexander, during his imprisonment, tells the story of one night he was so uncooperative in what the KGB wanted to try and do in re-educating was the word they used for their prisons. And he was put in prison or in a cell one night, and it was the middle of winter, way below zero, and they smashed the windows of the room he was in. It wasn't a cell; it was his private room where he was locked in. They broke the windows, expecting in the morning to find him dead.
Yeah, frozen to death, yeah.
And when they came in the morning, he was as normal as anyone, even temperature-wise. They could not understand it. Much later, we found out that it was that very night that a prayer meeting, a young lady in the Philippines, of all places, a young Filipina lady was awakened at night. And the Lord told her to pray for Alexander Ogorodnikov. That's all she knew. She got her friends together, and they actually had a prayer meeting for Alexander in the middle of the night. And he said, later he met them. He actually met them, and he was really very touched. And he said, I could physically feel the warmth of your prayers in that night when they thought I was going to freeze to death. And he said the warmth was palpable. He said it was just there. And I knew that somebody was praying for me, because otherwise I would have been gone long before that. That was one of his testimonies of that time.
That's an amazing,
an
amazing story to think of how, our brother in a prison in Siberia was impacted by a group of Christians in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Because God, called them to pray. Yeah. And it just reminds us the difference that we can make when we begin to pray for our brothers and sisters across the globe today.
Yes, they didn't know exactly what was happening, but and I don't think at that time they were aware of how impacting their prayer would be. We started a prayer campaign on his behalf, and by 1988, which was the year my first group trip to Russia, it was the 1000th anniversary of Christianity in the country. Christianity started in 988 in Kiev, Ukraine, under Vladimir, Prince Vladimir. And so they were celebrating, actually the churches of Russia were celebrating their millennium in 1988. And it was in early 88 that Alexander was finally released from prison. And he went right back to Moscow and started a street ministry, which he has done to this day. He runs like what we would call the downtown street ministry for people that are down and out, people that are homeless, women of the street, whatever. He has had a tremendous ministry in that city ever since. Nothing stops him. Yeah. But he has done many meetings for Open Doors, sharing how that prayer for him during his prison time made such a difference in his life, and gave him that awareness that God is real and that he's worth serving. And he to me, he's just one very great example of someone whose life was impacted by Open Doors and Open Doors supporters, and made a huge difference right to today.
Amazing. Well, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today and highlight some of the amazing things God has done in the last 70 years through Open Doors. And thank you for your ministry and your work, the way God has used you through Open Doors, and used you to do so many amazing things. Thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for watching this interview. We hope you enjoyed it. And I hope that you understand just how important your prayers are and the difference your prayers are making for our persecuted family. We encourage you to continue to pray each and every day. To get the latest prayer points, you can check out our website, opendoorscanada.org, or follow us on social media at Open Doors Canada. God bless.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Open Doors Canada podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so that you know when our next episode is out. You can learn more about what persecuted Christians face and how you can help to strengthen them on our social media at Open Doors Canada or at our website, opendoorscanada.org.